Hello, everybody. We're getting a few more people in here. Excited to see you all. We have a really awesome session today. So, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us for our series today. This is our Tree Talk series, part 1. My name is Chelsea, and I work at the CSU Alumni Association, and we're so glad to have you. Before we jump in, I just wanted to take a few moments to do some housekeeping items for us. So we are running this on YouTube, and we'd love for you to be able to ask questions. We'll monitor those throughout this session and be able to get some answers on the fly. So feel free to put those into the chat. You can also email me at chelsea.wiseman@colostate.edu, and I'll make sure to get those along as well. I also wanted to take a moment and thank our CSU Alumni Association members. Thank you so much for your membership. It makes a huge difference to our CSU community, and it makes events like this and resources like this available to you all. So now, why you all are here. This is part 1 of our 3-part Tree Talk series, and these are building blocks from our tree series that Cami did for us last year, which explored a variety of topics to help us better understand and care for the trees in our yard. And in these Tree Talk series, Cami's going to help us build on the foundations that we learned by taking a deeper dive into some of those topics. So you can find the original 3-part tree series on our YouTube page to get more of a foundation of where some of these deeper dive topics are coming from. But now I want to introduce Cami Long, who is the Urban and Community Forestry Specialist for the Western Slopes and works for the Colorado State Forest Service out of Grand Junction. Some of the day-to-day work that Cami does includes visiting with communities and landowners about a variety of tree issues, educating homeowners and master gardeners on proper tree selection, planting, and pruning, and supporting communities with a variety of urban forestry issues. Our tree guru. So now I'm going to kick it off to Cami.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Glad to be back. Thought we've picked some great expansion topics for our series this year. So like Chelsea said, please feel free to ask questions. Chelsea will decide if it makes sense to ask them during the presentation or just wait till the end, but feel free to ask those questions. And like she said, these are building on an hour-long presentation, 3-hour-long presentations I did last year. So if you are listening to this going, boy, I wish I had more information, please just look for those on the YouTube channel from last year, and you'll get that information that you're looking for. So we're going to do part 1, which is navigating the garden center with confidence. The purpose of this presentation is that you've selected your tree based on one of the presentations from last year with the information that I shared, and you've arrived at the garden center, but the tree you chose is not available. So you want to leave with a tree, but they don't have the tree you selected. So how do you pivot? So that's what we're going to talk through today. So our agenda is just kind of some high level, what are your landscape goals? Just reminding you what the hardiness zone map is, talking about tree characteristics, and then really getting into what you'll want to know at the nursery is how to read those tree tags, and then just some selection and tree planting tips, because I can't talk about tree selection and trees without talking about planting. So first, what are your goals for the landscape? You want to try to find a tree with the characteristics that meet those goals. That little saying, the Greek proverb said old men, but it's really people, right? I plant trees too. Old women plant trees, so I put old people. Let's just be all inclusive here. So why do you want to plant a tree? Are you doing it for shade and cooling of your house or your backyard? Are you planting because you want it for wind protection, because they're pretty, which is a perfectly reasonable answer of why you want to plant a tree? A visual barrier, ecological benefits the tree provides, or as my mother-in-law would say, a place to hang her bird feeder. These are all fine reasons to plant a tree, but each one might have some different characteristics. So when you're choosing your trees, you want to make sure that the tree is going to meet the characteristics that you need to meet your goals. So starting off, we want to make sure that we're looking at the plant hardiness for where you're planting at. You can go to your search engine and type in the USDA plant hardiness map. The website is there, planthardiness.ars.usda.gov, and it will bring up the whole US and you can see the different color zones. So plant hardiness is based on the average lowest temperatures, not the lowest ever, the lowest average temperature for your area, and they were updated in 2023. So here's Colorado, and you can see where the color variations, the cooler, higher up in the mountains. So those are lower zones numbers, and the lower you go in elevation, the higher the numbers go because it's warmer average temperatures. So zooming in for an example of what this looks like, I type in my zip code in Grand Junction, 81504. I click on click to zoom, and it brings in Grand Junction. And then what I wanted to show is that if you click on one of the different on any of the colors, it will bring up a pop-up. So right here, I've clicked on the blue, and it's brought the pop-up here of showing the plant hardiness zone, which is 5B, but it also tells you what the actual temperature that zone covers, which is good to note because sometimes, and you'll see this on the tree tags and the information at nurseries, they don't always list the hardiness zone, but they'll list the temperature range. And so if you're like, well, I know I'm 5B, but you don't know what that temperature range is for 5B, then you might not be able to use that information when you get to the garden center if it's only listing the temperatures and not the zone. So note your zone, but also that temperature range that zone covers. So now we'll get into the actual part of the presentation for the topic. What if you did your research at home, but the nursery doesn't have the tree selected? First, I would recommend trying to prevent this scenario by a couple different options. One, a lot of nurseries will have their inventory online, so you can check there, or at least it will tell you if they have the species variety online. You can call the nursery before you leave the house to ask, but I would also ask how many they have in stock, because if they only have one or two, you might get there and find that they don't meet the criteria that I would recommend you leave with, which I'll share with you in a little bit. So you might, but if they had 10, you'll most likely find one of the trees that you can go home with. So if they only have a couple, then you might want to have a backup, which is number 4 on that list. So if you can ask how many they have in stock, that can help you make a better decision and arrive with more information. And if that nursery doesn't have what you're looking for, you have options. If you're on the Front Range, you probably have more options than you do in the rural areas, but you could call nearby nurseries to see if they have the tree that you're looking for in stock. And I always do recommend having a couple tree species selected as backups. I do struggle with this because friends will ask me, what tree should I plant? And I'll list all these great trees, but then they go to the nursery and maybe they're not available. And so it can be hard to make recommendations not knowing what the nursery has. So if you can go online or give them a call, then you won't show up and have this situation that we're going to learn about. So when you're at home and you've selected your tree, you were looking at specific characteristics. And these are the things that you want to consider when you're standing in the nursery going, oh, darn it, they don't have this specific tree species I wanted. Then you need to remember, what were the characteristics that I was looking for so I can then find a tree that matches and has those same characteristics. So how tall do you want that tree to get? How wide? Is it going under a power line so you can't let it get very tall? Or does it have as much space as it needs because it's going in your big backyard? So that's where the goals come into play. Is it an ornamental? Is it a shade? You need to know how tall and wide your tree can get. What zone you're planting in. The nursery really should be carrying trees that are in your zone, but sometimes those trees are on the cusp of your zone. When I first moved to Grand Junction, I purchased a Rose of Sharon tree that was right on the edge of our zone number. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. You know, it's still in our zone. It's just right on the edge of our zone cold hardiness. And then we had a really, really cold snap that winter, actually. And the tree died from being too cold because it wasn't cold hardy enough. And so I went to the nursery the next spring and picked out another Rose of Sharon that was solidly in my zone numbers, and it has done fantastic ever since. So if getting a tree if you're in a zone 7 and the tree that you're getting is a zone 7-9 or 8-9, you want to maybe be careful with getting a tree like that. You want to try to get a tree that's like a 5-7, so that can handle colder temperatures than what you're planting in. The lower the number, the colder the tree can handle. And then just the note about having the actual temperatures written down and not just the zone numbers. The next question you want to be remembering and thinking about when you're looking at the trees at the nursery is, do you want the tree to have fruit? Is it okay if the tree has fruit on it, or are you solidly against fruit? Some trees have fruit that are persistent and will kind of hang on the tree, versus some that will fall to the ground and make maybe a little more of a mess. So that can also play into it, or maybe not be a mess, but just be something underfoot like an acorn. So you need to think about, when you're looking at trees for your pivot tree, is it okay if it has fruit or not? So you want to be thinking about that. You want to think about how much sun is available at your site, because these trees are, some like shade, some like full sun. So you want to make sure that you're getting a tree that matches the site characteristics as well, that it can thrive in the site that you're going to plant in. And that's where the water question comes in. How much water can you provide to that tree? Is it going to be in a site that you're not really going to be able to provide much water to it? Or is it going to be on a drip system or in your grass that it's going to get really consistent water? Because some of the trees are more drought tolerant than others. And then the last thing to think about is, can you provide annual pruning? And I put that on there because some trees are really fast growing, like cottonwoods and some maples, specifically box elders, are very fast growing. And if you're not pruning them annually, once they get established, you're kind of set yourself up for failure, because their structure is could get out of control, and you might have some unwanted structure formations that you don't want, like the codominant leaders. And so if you aren't interested in worrying about the annual pruning or keeping an eye on how fast a tree is growing, maybe you don't want to plant a fast growing tree. So for example, at the nursery, they might have a sign that looks like this, Quaking Aspen. The information on this sign has a lot of words on it, but to help you with the tree characteristics, there's really only 3 things on there that answer those questions about the tree characteristics. One is how tall it gets. One is how tall it gets here. 2 is the species is a pure species, so you're not getting a hybrid aspen, or not a hybrid, but like a cultivar. So with aspens, they come as male or female trees. So you don't know if you're getting a male or a female aspen if it's not a cultivar that they've selected to make sure that it's going to be a male tree. So you're seeing just a straight scientific name, Populus tremuloides, which means that it's not a cultivar. And then it's hardy to -45. And so that's why I was pointing out that it might not always say what zone it is, but it might say a temperature. And so, like I said, some trees are called monoecious and some are called dioecious. And so the difference is that a monoecious, mono meaning one, means that both the male and the female reproductive organs are on the same individual plant. And so you can't purchase trees that don't produce fruit. Dioecious, dio meaning 2, meaning they have a male tree and a female tree. They are separate trees. And so you can purchase male trees that should remain fruitless. So for example, maples, you can get male trees and female trees. With ginkgos, you can get male trees and female trees. Most people do not want female ginkgos because the females produce this fruit, which is very, very stinky. Oaks are monoecious. They will always have an acorn. You cannot buy an oak tree that does not produce an acorn. And then honey locust and Kentucky coffee tree. This is just an image that I took comparing their seed pods. So these are both from female trees. The pod on the left is a honey locust. The pod on the right is a Kentucky coffee tree pod. And so these are from female trees, but both of these trees are dioecious, meaning that you can get a male tree that doesn't have the pods. So if you're like, I really want an oak, but I don't want to have the acorns, well, then you're not going to be able to find a tree that fits those characteristics, because oaks will always have an acorn. They might not produce massive amounts of acorns depending on the species, but they will always produce an acorn. So now we're going to talk about reading those tree tags. So you're like, okay, I know my characteristics. I know how tall and wide I want the tree to be. I know if I want fruit or not. I know what my zone is. I know what how much sun the site gets. I know what my water needs and how much water I can provide are. Now I need to start looking at these tree tags, and now I need to start interpreting what these tree tags say. And so here's two examples. I have a couple different examples of what you might see at the nursery. This is one side of this tree tag here for a heritage oak. So the X means that it's a hybrid oak. And that this yellow dot isn't just by accident. It means that it's a full sun tree, which it will tell you on the back. And then this tree card here on the back side, it just gives planting instructions. And so I don't include the backside in this image, but here's what the backside of that card, the oak card is, and then a close up of the information on the plane tree. So the things that you want to be reading here is we want to make sure we're planting correctly, but the features we want to be looking for is exposure, full sun. Okay, so we don't want to be planting this in a shady spot. If our spot is shady, then this isn't the tree for us. The soil type, plant in well-drained soil, that is important. There's not much we can do. You can't really change your soil type. So if you know that you have a really clayey soil that does not drain, then this probably isn't the tree for you either. Here's the size, the height, and the width, 50 feet tall by 40 feet wide. You want to make sure that it's at least 40 feet away from other trees and probably structures. So to make sure those branches aren't growing into anything. And then it just gives you some general information. It's a tough, fast growing shade tree for larger areas. It grows moderate to fast. Here's your zone information. So in this case, it gives you the zone number and the temperature range. Watering is moderate, and prune when dormant, but that's actually what I would recommend for most trees. So that gives you some information. So if you know you don't want a tree that is that large, then this oak isn't for you. If you don't want a tree that produces acorns, well, it doesn't specifically say anything about acorns. You know, because you attended this presentation, that an oak will have an acorn. So the information about the tree on the right-hand side are plane tree. We know that it's a zone 5. So there, it's not giving us our temperature range, it's just giving us the number. The height is 55 by 35, so another big tree. The shape is upright pyramidal, which can help you, but mostly you're looking at the height and the spread. The shape is additional information. The foliage and the fall color, well, that's helpful information. That's nice to know. It's not part of the tree characteristics that really should be determining which tree you're getting. You want to make sure that it's fitting the site, height and width wise, and zone wise, water wise, sun wise. And then it just gives you a bunch of other information that it's moderately resistant to powdery mildew, which is nice that they share that information, that it's anthracnose resistant. That's a big thing. We in Grand Junction, our American sycamores do get anthracnose, which is why people started planting plane trees was because they were more resistant to anthracnose. So these are the things you want to be looking for on these cards, these tree tags. And you can see that there's different layouts depending on the company that the tree is coming from. So in this case, it has a little bit of a right up here, exposure full sun, zone 5, height 25 to 35, width 13 to 15, because this is a fastigied tree, meaning narrow. And so while it doesn't really show that anywhere else on this card, that width is telling you that it's a very narrow tree. Here we have a magnolia, a Galaxy of Magnolia tree, just on a very simple piece of plastic that they've typed it on. The height is 30 to 40, width is 20 to 25. Moisture is medium. Flower is the red purple in the late spring. Exposure, sun to part shade. So sometimes with these tags, some of the words start to rub off. So you have to use common sense to figure out what they're trying to say here. We have zone 5, fall color yellow. So the key things on this tag would be height and width. Moisture is medium. Exposure, sun, part shade, and zone 5. The rest is good information, but not critical to your decision making if it is a good substitute for what you came to buy. Some trees have these fancy QR codes. I took a picture of this QR code and it brought up the vine maple, which is not what that tree tag was. It is the Royal Raindrop crabapple, but that QR code brought up the vine maple. So, you know, sometimes helpful, sometimes not, but what it should have brought up was this. And then it can give you more information about that tree, the zone, the height, the width, and some of the information about what makes it so great. Another one, here's that plane tree, but taking a picture of that QR code, and it did bring up the correct information. And so if you have a smartphone that you can use on site and get some more information so you are making an educated decision, definitely take advantage of that. Sometimes they'll have the codes. Sometimes you can type in the tree information. But what I do want to point out is the tags don't always give the whole story. The purple robe locust is a beautiful tree. Well, it has a beautiful flower. It is a locust, so it has thorns. However, here in Grand Junction, I typed in while I was standing at the nursery, purple robe locust, insect or disease, Colorado. And it brought up immediately that it's a high maintenance tree and it's susceptible to the locust borer. And that's very true, that if you plant a purple robe locust, you're going to have to manage and prevent the locust borer from attacking the tree, because locust borer and purple robe locust go hand in hand. If you plant one, you will have the other. So you have to then take preventative measures to prevent the borer from attacking your tree. And so you might want to then, once you narrow your trees down, do a search to make sure there's no major insect or disease issues that might attack or impact your tree. If you're looking at fruit trees, it's important to look at this part here that says here it's self-fertile. A lot of apple trees would not be self-fertile. You need another malice, either an apple or a crab apple, to help fertilize. So you want to be reading information on the signs and thinking about fertilization if you are buying a fruit tree, because most trees will not, some trees will not self-fertilize. So you have to be paying attention if you're purchasing a tree that will self-pollinate itself. Will the pollen from that tree pollinate itself to produce fruit? And that's not always the case. So make sure you're looking at that, because in some cases you need 2 trees. So like Turkish filberts, you need 2 filberts in order to produce filberts. If you want to produce pecans, you need 2 pecans, because they will not self-pollinate. Another thing to note is that they sell multiple sizes in your nursery. So for example, here's a bur oak, a number 15. That is it says 1 1/4 inch for $300. Here's another bur oak and a number 7. That's the pot size. So the number next to it means it's in a number 15 pot. This means it's in a number 7 pot. And then it just says 6 to 7 feet, which just means how tall the tree is, but it's not giving you an inch. But then I found this tag that says cherry first blush, number 7, 1 inch. And so what I want you to take away from this is that when a tree is still in its container or as a ball and burlap tree, before it's planted, we give measurements as caliper. And caliper is measured 6 inches above the root flare. Once the tree is planted, then we talk about diameter at breast height, which is 4.5 feet above the ground. When it's not planted, we talk about the size of the tree in caliper, measured 6 inches above the root flare. And so you can see that there's quite a price difference for about 1/4 inch in stem size. So here is your number 15, your 1 1/4 inch. Here is your number 7. That's about an inch. And it's $125 difference. I recommend going with the cheaper one. There's no reason to plant a larger tree. Larger trees take a little longer to establish in your landscape. The smaller trees can deal with the transplant shock a little easier. They get their roots established quicker in the landscape, and it's less money. It's also smaller and easier to move around the landscape yourself versus a heavier pot. So just wanted to explain a little bit about the difference in some of the numbers you'll see. So caliper, again, is measured about 6 inches above root flare. So we're running a little short on time, but just wanted to a few things to look for in the nursery. A strong leader on your shade trees. This tree here had 2 leaders. So if I had to choose between 1, 2, or 3, I would have selected this one in the middle because it has a strong central leader that I wouldn't have to do much pruning to when I was planting it. I could fix these, or I could just buy a tree that was already looking good. Well, I'd have to prune something down here. You want to make sure it has a good root system. You don't want to buy a tree that's root system looks like that. It means it's been in the container for too long. If you pull a tree out of its pot and it looks like that, put it back in its pot and walk away. You want to make sure that you're not buying anything that has roots that are circling the stem. We call those girdling roots. Those become an issue over the life of the tree and can eventually cause the tree to fall over. You want to make sure that the ratio of the size of the root ball to the size of the tree makes sense. My husband is over 6 foot tall. So this tree is 12 feet tall. So it has been in the container for way too long. This is the size tree that it should be. It should be closer to his height. But they just keep putting it back available for sale, and that's why those root balls looked like they did in that one photo, is because it's been in that container for too long. So you want to make sure that your tree is not too tall, because the ratio of the stem to the root ball size is wrong. It's too tall for that root ball. You want to make sure that there's no damage to the trunk and that there's no insects visible on the tree. You don't want to pay money for a damaged or a product that has issues. And then lastly, you do not need to amend your site with fertilizer or soil amendments. If you are going to amend, you don't want to do more than 5% organic matter. The trick is that you don't want to make your planting hole so nice that those roots don't want to leave. If you add too many excellent nutrients and fertilizers and fancy things to your planting hole, you can pot your tree in place where then the roots don't want to leave the planting hole, because as soon as they leave, they're like, ooh, that soil is I'm not getting what I need or want out of that soil outside the planting hole. So I'm just going to stay here. So we really don't recommend doing much amendment to your soil. They've got to live in that landscape. So you can do a little bit of organic matter, but not much. Mulch is helpful, but we don't want, when we put the mulch around the tree, make sure it's not touching the trunk. The moisture that the mulch can hold can break down the bark on the tree. And then just a planting primer. If you have a bud grafted tree, It should be 2 to 3 inches above the soil line. And that's just where you'll see a bump or a nub, and where usually there's like a kind of a donut circle hole right here where the tree was, the root system's original leader was removed. You want your root flare visible and your top roots at soil line. I put together a handout on how to properly plant a tree. You can do a search for the Colorado State Forest Service Plant a Container Tree, or take a picture of this QR code that will take you directly to this document. And you can follow the steps on how to properly plant a tree. This is what I mean by the root graft, where it's a nub with a little hole in the middle, because that's where the original leader was that they removed. That was for the root system. And that is not the root flare, that is the root graft. And we have come to the end of our time together.
Thanks so much, Cami. One question that came through was, does age of the tree matter when you're looking at the nursery?
Well, you don't want a tree that's been in the container for too long, because that means that the root system is going to start to get woody and too big for the container. So you really don't want, so the age of the tree, it really just matters how long the tree's been in that container and what the root system looks like. Most reputable nurseries aren't going to be selling trees that are in trees that don't fit their pots. The box stores are where you're going to have issues. And that's where that picture of my husband, that was a box store where they're just putting those trees back in cold storage and bringing them back in the spring. So it's not really the age, it's really the length of time it's been in that container.
Helpful. Thank you for that. And just for fun, do you have a favorite tree, even, in Grand Junction, if you had somebody that was wanting to plant a tree that you love and recommend?
Oh, well, bur oaks are my favorite. They're very stately trees, and I do have one of those in my yard. I also have a Kentucky coffee tree. I have an Osage orange. I have a yellow horn and a rose of Sharon. I like all of those.
Oh, I'll have to look those up later. Well, thank you so much, Cami. This has been really awesome. And for those of you joining us, don't forget that we have a part 2 series on April 30th and a part 3 series on May 28th. So we hope to see you all there.
Thank you for joining.